Another episode of Raw and Unscripted. And we are excited to be sharing a topic that both of us can relate to. I think, really, on a deep level, because this has been important in our healing journeys. And
Mm.
that is the power of our stories and why your story matters. So today, welcome to the people who are joining us. I know there was a few regulars who said they were going to have to catch the replay today. So we'll see. Hopefully we'll have some people on here joining the conversation because I think it's a topic that, well, sharing your story is a scary thing to do. And so we might be stretching people a little bit, I think, Kim, as we talk about this today, but that's a good thing, right?
Yeah,
We need to stretch to grow.
absolutely. And it's not like we have to share our whole story in the first interaction, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Good morning to anyone who has popped in here. I think there's somebody here with us right now. It's Tuesday morning, and every single one of our episodes each week, we talk about so many different types of conversations and things that we believe will help you on some level, either right now or maybe they'll help you in the future, or maybe you're going to know somebody who needs some of the support, right? And I think that's why our YouTube channel is so valuable, because like all of our episodes are on there and you can literally go in there and just take a peek and use that 30 minutes as some inspiration, or to sometimes we just need a little. It's like taking your car to the mechanic, right? It just needs a little tune up. Our minds need a little tune up. We need a little different perspective, and today is going to be all about that. And I'm glad, Joanne, that you made it back. That's wonderful. So yeah, Kelly Ann and we actually met through a coach of ours that we work with, Marcia Van Weinsberg is her name. And it was all about helping us, take our stories and the things that, well, we came into that space because we believed that our story and what we learned through it and the lessons that we gleaned from it, I think that's the word I'm looking for, that they really can help someone else, and to really take that story and use that, moving that forward. Now, I know, Kellyanne, I want to go right in. I want to go right into those beginning stages of healing our stories and what that did for us, because when we start to recognize what it does for us, we then have more desire to help another person with it because we know the power in it, right? I know when I would sit in any spaces, whether I was in a group online, whether I was sitting in a room, I literally just told you before we went live about a video I watched of a woman sharing her story and how inspiring that was. But when I am around women, men, but of course, I definitely lean in for women's stories. When I can hear what they've gone through and who they are, it's like here I was and here I am now. It is so inspirational. But as I sit in these spaces and I would feel my own story and the parts of myself that I hadn't shared yet, or I was still healing from. And when I would be able to start to share, I would sit in so many spaces, and as I would say things and I was working through my own, what I know now, they were limiting beliefs, they were limiting stories about what I went through, but the shame that I still carried in them, or the worry that I still carried about them, and how as I would talk about them and I'd have other people expressing their feelings, or I felt that too, or I really needed to hear that, how that helped me. Because as I would share, I would cry, I would say things that I had never said to myself before, I would receive, and it really helped my healing journey begin. I don't know what for you, like, that's big for me, is that healing part for me.
It's interesting. I shared a story many, many years ago when I was just at the beginning stages before really I had healed.
Mhm.
And one of the things that Marcia taught us is that there's a difference between being in your story and being on your story.
Mhm.
And when I look back, I spoke at a number of things, but I spoke to 500 clergy,
Mhm.
and I shared my story of childhood sexual abuse by a clergy member. And I was still very much in my story. I was angry. I was the victim. I was, how dare you? So that I had a really interesting perspective when I look at how I shared my story then. And I don't know that I certainly wouldn't have helped somebody in my shoes with that
Mhm,
story.
mhm,
But then many, many years later, when I had the opportunity, when I had walked through the healing, when I could actually see my story from a different perspective,
mhm,
it was almost like I was above it and I could look at the lessons that I'd learned. I could look at the places where I could pull things out that I believed would help other people.
mhm,
It was a different story because I was now standing on my story. It was now a story of hope. It had, it shared, I shared the pain, of course, but it was more about the hope.
mhm,
And I think that is the story that people need to hear the most. And there is a time for us to be a victim and to be in that story. I will never take that away from anybody. And there's a time for us to share that story. And often when we share from that space, we just need somebody to listen,
mhm,
right? That is their role in it. We're not trying to teach them anything. We're not trying to give them any lessons. We just need somebody to be there to listen, to know we're not alone, to connect with somebody else. And so I think there's two very different sharings of
mhm,
stories,
mhm,
and they are both important. And
mhm,
sometimes I guess what my hope is, and some of the work that I've been doing and some of the events I've been creating have been so that we can get people when they are when they are through the healing journey, when they are standing on their stories, so they can share the hope. And that's why I created my event Unspoken, was
yeah.
to be able to do exactly that. So,
Yeah, and I love that, and you know what's coming to my mind right now is, and I mean that might, this isn't necessarily even part of today's episode, but it's just this place of recognizing, like, how long, and this is not something that I'm expecting you to answer, but it's like how long, we know that the healing process is important. We know that being a victim and feeling, looking outward is a part of it, but it's this place of how long does someone stay there? Like, they, you know, that, because we know what that does to you, right? We know what it does when you are holding on to the pain and you're holding on to the story and the way you're telling the story. We know that it does do something to you versus when we're able to then have some time, have some healing take place, and we're able to now look at it from a different perspective. And I don't know if, well, quite frankly, I don't think people necessarily know how to do that unless you're
mhm,
in spaces where people are helping you
mhm,
recognize why your story, when we keep saying this, your story, it's the life, it's experiences that you went through, it's events that happened to you, um, why they were there for you, what they have done for you to help you be who you are today,
mhm,
right? But I guess that's the part for me is when people aren't able to make that shift, you know, they're
mhm.
staying in it for so long.
Yeah, it's interesting that you just talked about what is a story, because I read a quote today that I thought was so cool.
Mhm.
To be a person is to have a story to tell.
Totally, totally.
And that is so true. And I think I remember back sharing, being in the staff room. I was a teacher for 25 years, being in the staff room with just one other person. And I shared the story of a bit of a struggle that a family member was going through with some mental health issues.
Mhm,
And I just kind of shared that it was weighing heavy on me. And she said to me, "Oh my God, you too?"
mhm,
She said, "I never talk about that because I didn't think anybody else would understand." And I just couldn't believe how all of a sudden we connected.
mhm,
All of a sudden, she didn't feel so alone, and I didn't feel so alone. I had
Mhm.
somebody now that I could share that challenge with. And sometimes that being able to share with somebody who can relate helps you to kind of problem solve. It helps you to process. It helps you to, um, to just get through it a little bit easier. And that moment was really I had always been kind of vulnerable with my story, but that moment, I just saw the way her heart opened and this release came over her, and I thought, wow, like stories are so important, and sharing your vulnerability with somebody can really change somebody else's life.
Yeah. And we never see, I guess that's the other thing with this is we never know, like depending on where you choose to share your story. I mean, obviously we share our stories very publicly. We're not saying that you have to do that. I mean, it's all about, you could be sitting with a friend and the friend is feeling, some shame about something. And you could take that as an opportunity with someone that you trust, someone that you feel like you can share some of your story with, which is important. And you can share a little bit of that. And you get to share what you want to share. You get to share how you want to share it from your perspective. But that moment of doing that with that person can be so impactful. Now, with us sharing publicly, and I know that you've experienced this and I've experienced it so much, we put out our messages, we put out our stories, our videos, and we know, I remember at the beginning of this journey that I'm on, and we always say it's crickets. It's crickets. I'm putting out this most vulnerable post. I've put so much thought into it. I was careful with the way I wrote it. It's crickets. And you think, why? Why am I doing this? And then slowly the DMs come in. Slowly that person reaches out to you. And then you hear, I've been following you for a year. Your messages have helped me so much. And those are the stories and the reminders that I need to continue. I could choose. Like, I'm not here anymore sharing my story for me. Like, I mean, there was a part of me sharing my story and the writing that I've done. Like, if I look at all the posts on Instagram, like my journal, my diary was Facebook. Like, I
Mhm.
literally would write and write and write as a way for me to express what was on my heart. I could choose to stop that now. I'm not doing this for me anymore. I'm doing this for the people that are receiving my message, that need to hear my story and need to have the hope for my story. The thing about it is we just don't ever know who it is. Like, and I guess that's inspiration for all of us is to never doubt. I love people who are not, this is not a career for them, this is not their big why, but they use their social media as an outlet, they use it as a place of expression, of sharing parts of themselves. I love that because you just never know who's needing it, right? That's the power of social media.
You're right. The one thing, though, I would say is that you and I have done a lot of healing.
Mhm,
And if somebody, because this happened to me
mhm,
when I started to share my story, I had some haters.
mhm,
And I think if you are not at a place in your life where you feel safe to share, where you feel like you've healed much of, I mean, the healing never stops, but
yeah,
where you feel like you've healed a lot of it, then maybe you can share it publicly.
mhm,
Um, but I think as individuals who are maybe just starting to share, I believe that people have to earn the right to hear
mhm,
your story.
mhm,
And I've talked to people who have shared their story with the wrong person,
mhm,
who've used it against them or whatever it is. So I think you have to, if you are just beginning to share or if you're just starting to open up with one person, because I believe that sharing your story, even with one person, is healing for you. I
mhm,
believe that our stories are meant to be heard by somebody else.
mhm,
So when you decide to do that, just make sure that person has earned the right.
So, so important. I mean, that's Brene Brown's work, right? Where
Exactly.
it's really, really important because
Yeah.
then it's like you share something, and I've seen this too. I've heard this too. It's like I share something vulnerable with a friend and they told someone else, right? And then it's like I'm never opening up again, right? So
Mhm.
again, I guess I just want to remind us, well, and first of all, stories don't have to be the big, big, deep, vulnerable ones. There's lots of ways that you can share a story that isn't going deeply vulnerable at you. And you can also, mind you, this is a bit of a craft, and you've probably had to work this craft too, but how you can share stories without giving all the details and how you can
Mhm.
share a message without really sharing the story.
Mhm.
um, but but yeah, it's just a matter of deciding. And I know for me, well, I can think of some people where I've shared a little bit and I'm literally consciously testing the water, right?
Mhm.
People like to probe. They like to probe, they like to ask questions, they like to dig into your life. Like that's just what some people like to do, right? And I'm
Mhm.
always very like, well, what's this person's intention here? Especially if I don't know this person. Like let's say I'm somewhere where there's a lot of people that I don't know, and they're probing some of my story out and they're asking me questions in a way that I maybe haven't shared. I'm not about to just divulge something to a stranger, right? Like I get
Mhm.
to decide what I share, how I share it. And
Mhm.
I mean, so much of my story it is in my past, but there's still parts of my story that are still in my today, right?
Mhm.
So that's important because we don't want to move ourselves backwards. We don't want to go back into our shell, our cage where we have kept ourselves locked and protected from the world. We want to be able to start to come out and find some of that freedom, that healing that's possible, and then recognizing, I guess this is where I want to take it, is when we start to share with people, who then starts to come into our life, how our friendships change, how our conversations change. I've said this before. I love conversations that matter, that make a difference. So if I could sit down with a couple women and hear some of their stories and what they've learned about it, I mean, like I'm leaning in. That's what I want to hear,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. And that's, me too. Like, I want to hear people's stories. Like,
Mhm.
how did you get to where you are today? Like, what has affected your life? What has happened to you that has made you the person that you are?
Mhm.
And, I think that the one you talked about, Brene Brown,
Mhm.
and my gosh, Brene Brown really, her work has changed my life in many ways. And the one thing that I know, um, is that most of my life I carried a lot of shame.
Mhm.
And Brene Brown says that shame and empathy can't live on the same street.
Mhm.
So if you have a story of shame, having an empathetic listener, it takes the shame, it takes the power from
Mhm.
the shame.
Mhm.
And that is so much a part of healing, because shame likes to live in the darkness, right? It grows in the silence, it grows in the secrets. And as soon as you start to share it with an empathetic listener, with somebody who has earned the right to hear it,
Mhm.
then um, you take some of the power away from it. And, I think when you when we start to use our stories to help other people, in a bigger way,
Mhm.
like maybe you and I do, and other people kind of in our space, we give permission for other people to start to share too.
Mhm.
I think, um, as I say, like my unspoken event, it was sharing stories. 4 women shared their most personal stories. And one of the things I said to the audience is that they are going first.
That's what I was literally about to say. Yep.
Their courage is showing you that you can do this too, even if it's just to one person.
Yeah.
I had people as I was starting to share my story, I had people come to me and say, "That happened to me too. You're the first person I've ever told."
Mhm.
And so just that, knowing that maybe I'm the only person they've ever told, maybe they'll never tell anybody else, but telling one person, that has healed them in a way. I love Karen just said storytelling begets storytelling. Exactly.
Yeah.
We go first.
Yeah.
We allow other people to do the same, to use their story to heal them and to heal others.
Oh my gosh. And I just think to myself, like the weight and the pain that somebody has carried, keeping that story locked away.
Mm,
Where if we think of all of our generations of what we were told, like from our parents, you don't tell anyone this. This is this kid, this goes nowhere, like those types of comments.
mm,
And so
mhm.
we tuck it away and we know what happens to the body when we've tucked
It does.
away pain and when we have unprocessed pain
Mhm,
and what may or may not has happened to us. It makes such a difference when we have one person. And this is the thing. I guess I'm gonna again, these are raw and unscripted, so just gonna let this come out because it's on my heart right now. If you're sitting with someone, it's I'm thinking of you, Kellyanne, with your story, and you think to yourself, like, what do I say to this person? Like Kellyanne could be far in her healing journey, but you're sitting here going, I don't know what to say. You know, understand this when somebody starts to share, if somebody decides to choose you, they feel safe with you and they want to you're that one person that they have felt brave enough and safe enough around to open up. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to have an answer. You don't have to have some inspirational story. It can be as simple as, thank you so much for sharing that with me.
mhm,
And then letting that be, because that in itself lets a person know that you appreciate what they shared. Like, I guess that's the other thing too, because sometimes, gosh, there's some big stories. I remember been going to Mo Mondays, inspirational storytelling from the stage since 2018, and I've heard some oh, powerful, challenging stories, and some of them will just knock you right out of your chair. What people have lived through
mhm,
and what they're choosing to share publicly,
mhm,
right? But that is their mission. And so just being there, not just be there for that person and allow yourself to sit in some of that discomfort, right? If they've chosen you to share a little bit with, but also know that, you don't, if you're not ready to hear all the details of their story, you also protect yourself too.
mhm.
But what I would love to just encourage you to do is if you are a person right now that's listening and you have a story that you're ready that you feel you need to share, you get to decide what that looks like, who you do that with, right? And maybe your storytelling starts to happen with yourself. Maybe it happens with a journal
Mhm.
and you taking your pen to a piece of paper and sharing some of your experiences out, because this is about honoring our lives and what have happened to us and wanting to heal that part of ourself and beginning to share some of that, actually be witness to what has happened to you and the resilience that you have, that you've made it through. And then you get to decide whether or not and when you want to share that with someone.
I love that, Kim. Like sharing it with yourself and writing it down in a journal, journaling about it. That is a hard thing to do.
Mm,
You know, many of us hold on to things, and it's like if I used to say, it was like I had a box, like a drawer in my mind
mhm,
that I had put things, and I just closed the
mhm,
drawer. And I
mhm.
never had to look at it, I said.
And it's never there, right? Tuck it in the drawer and it's not there.
Exactly, but what I never realized, and what most people never realized, is it is infiltrating the rest of your life. It is affecting everything you do. Um, And when you start to journal, when you start to open up to yourself about how a painful story has affected your emotions, your actions, your beliefs.
And your soul, like your spirit, right?
Exactly. That is a challenging thing in itself. And I love that you brought that up, that maybe that is the beginning
Mm.
of sharing your story, because sometimes when you can get it, it's really interesting because I had shared my story a lot. And then when I had to write it down for a book, even for, well, it was just for a chapter,
Yeah.
it was it was hard to kind of pull it all together and for it to, I had a limited number of
Hard.
words that I could use, and I somehow had to kind of bring it into a picture that people could actually take something from and experience and kind of walk through the journey with me. And I think that's I believe that, and because I believe the power of, sharing your story, people sharing their story publicly, if they choose to, I think that's an amazing exercise to actually do that for yourself, to write your story down as if you were writing it for a chapter in a book. Because maybe someday you might decide to do that. I never thought I would do it. And I was called to do it. Kim, I'm sure you never thought you would write your story in a
No,
book, but you
no.
did.
Totally. Yeah. We
Yeah.
should just plug our stories. My story is shared in a book called Owning Your Choices, stories of courage and inspiration from women around the world. And it's on Amazon. And in there, you'll hear of my story. My chapter is called Hungry to Heal. And this is where I speak of my relationship with food, my eating disorder, my disordered eating, and self worth through the years. But in our book, also, are stories of women who have survived suicide, the story of divorce, the story of loss, the story of human trafficking. Really, really powerful stories. And the thing about it is again, we haven't touched on this yet today. And then I want you to talk about your chapter, Kellyanne. Is understand this, that I don't have to I don't have to have experienced Kellyanne's story to be able to reap the lessons and take those lessons and apply them to my own life.
Mhm,
Okay, our stories are all connected. We can learn from each other.
mhm,
And so when we look at the book that I published in, I mean, I can take the wisdom and the lessons from the human trafficking story. And I've lost this woman's name right now, and I wish I remembered it. She's an incredible woman. I can take what she learned about herself and use those lessons and apply them to my own life. So
mhm,
that's another reason why we share our stories, because
mhm.
again, we're more the same than we are different.
And I think I have used stories in my healing so much, other people's stories, and every story I read, whether it's in a book, in a podcast, in an event, it changes me somehow.
Mm,
And that's what our stories do for people. They change them. You aren't the same person after you have heard somebody's story. It changes you. The book that I am published in is called She Is Worthy, and is also on Amazon. And it's a story. It's a book full of women who had to fight for their worth, or who felt they had to fight for their worth. And my story is called Shame Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
mm,
And it is the story of my healing from childhood sexual abuse by a parish priest. And there are many different stories in there of women who have had things happen to them that they felt that kind of stole their worth from them, that they felt they had to fight for their worth.
mm. That's what I love, is there's so many opportunities. These are collaborative books that we're talking
Mhm.
about, where there's multiple authors. Each author has a chapter, and they're all around a theme. This is very trending, right? Because it allows. It's a great place too. Like I still have a desire to write a book one day. I'm not sure what's holding me back from that.
You should do it.
But you bring up the point that you had shared your story for so many times, but putting it to writing. Well, first of all, yeah, we were limited. We're limited on the amount
Mhm,
words we're allowed to have, but it's also just another mode, right? It's
mhm,
another mode of communication. And I think also there's something to be said. Like, it's very interesting how I can put a post out on Facebook. I mean, it wasn't like this at the beginning, but now I can just put a post out and trust how it is. It doesn't have to
mhm,
be
mhm,
perfect. I don't get in my head as much about it, and I can write more freely. But if I were writing for a book that's published and it's going to be
mhm,
out there forever and ever, amen.
mhm,
It's like it's different. And going back to one of your limiting beliefs, I am not a writer. Um,
mhm,
right? It's again like, and again, when we talk about speaking versus writing, I think this is one of the reasons why I love to speak openly from my heart versus writing something out and trying to not memorize it, but trying to hold on to that main message. I love speaking freely because my subconscious, I can just speak from my heart. I'm not getting stuck in all of the shoulds and all of this, right? It's just free flowing and it comes quickly. My brain, my ego doesn't have a chance. Like I'm just free flowing right now, right? So
mhm, mhm,
that's again, that's what happens through conversation though, right? That's what happens when you're sitting with someone who you feel safe with, someone that you care about, and you're being there as two souls, two sisters, two women speaking together and being able to witness that person in their vulnerability. Because for anyone to be vulnerable with you or for you to be vulnerable with someone, this is not easy,
mhm,
right? So I really respect that, especially when people somebody just did this on the weekend with me. We were exchanging DMs and she told me so much stuff and she said, "Wow, I just told you a lot of stuff." And I'm like, "That's okay." And then I saw a reel that said, you have the 7 qualities of a healer, and number 1 was that people open up to you.
mm,
It's that's what
mhm,
it's about. And I think going back to the fact that we've been on social for so long, sharing, people really get to know who we are.
mhm,
Oh yeah, and I know you in person. I see you. We show up the same way in our social as we do in real life,
mhm,
right? And so people relate to that.
mhm, mhm. Oh, wow. This has been a great conversation. We knew it would be, Kim. We said that, right? This
Mhm.
is, the power of story and is just so strong. And so we hope that maybe you have been inspired to share your story with one person. If you haven't, maybe it's writing in a book, maybe it's speaking it on the stage. If you want to share your story at an event, I am always looking for storytellers
Love it.
for my unspoken events. So please reach out to me if that's something that you would love to do.
Yeah.
So I guess we are at the end of our time. I just want to do a quick plug. Tomorrow I am hosting a free masterclass called Unlocking You, and I'm going to give you some first steps to unlocking your infinite potential and creating a life you love. If you would love to be there, please, you will find me on my social media. The links are all there. It's happening 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, but there will be a replay. So,
Amazing. It's
mhm,
gonna be you got so many people signed up, which I love. It speaks to the fact that people need the message and they need to hear it from you. So I'm so glad that you're offering that.
thank
Yeah.
you.
And as always, if anybody is ever looking for some additional support, whether that be through helping you with your relationship with food, with your body image, with your self-worth, you know that I'm here for you. Complimentary calls are always available, and we can have a little chat and see how I can support you. And maybe you can share a little bit of your story with me, and that can be the beginning of your journey. And then we can take it from there. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in. We appreciate you. Go check out our past episodes if you haven't. They're all available on the YouTube channel. And we will see you back next Tuesday, same time, same place.
Bye, everyone.
See you soon.